see everybody. Councilmember Rapslider is traveling. Councilmember Tidswell is with us online. So if anybody sees Councilmember Tidswell's little yellow hand, please call my attention to it. Or Councilmember Tidswell, if we're not recognizing you, feel free to just speak up at any point. This is a work session, so for any members of the public who might not know, our work sessions are a little bit more informal. As opposed to our regular business decision or business meetings. So at these work sessions, we may give direction to staff, but otherwise do not make binding formal decisions. Copy of our agenda is back on the table there, but tonight there's only 2 items on our agenda. First, presentation by Off the Streets, and the next updates to our zoning code. So before we jump into public comment on any item, I'll just ask Chris, our city administrator, do you have anything you want to report before we get into our regular agenda?
Just quickly, I know it's hard in the middle of the day, but tomorrow at 2 o'clock, we've got scheduled for the training on the technology in the new council chambers. Just can't emphasize how important it is that we test that with all of you, because we also have to make a decision as to whether we're sticking with February 3rd in the new council chambers with the auditors on the utilities. So we don't want to get in there that night and be fumbling around with technology and having issues. If that's what it's looking like, we'll be back, we'll stay here. But if tomorrow goes well and people are feeling comfortable with things, then there's a lot of reasons to get into the new council chambers. The sound is excellent, the systems work well, et cetera, et cetera. So if you can make it at 2, please prioritize it. We'll test things, train on the equipment, and go from there. That's all that I'll report.
Very good, thank you, Chris. Just a reminder for members of the council and also members of the public making public comment to please keep your voices up so that the microphone can pick it up. For Channel 7 is recording this meeting as our other meetings, and the microphone for us is what I call the pizza box above your head, and then that will also is why it's important to use the microphone for any members of the public and put your mouth pretty close to that microphone, otherwise it's not very sensitive and won't pick up. So with that, we'll move to our agenda, and the first item is just public comment on any item. We will have an opportunity for public comment on the 2 items on our agenda about halfway through and after the presentation on those items. So feel free to wait if you want to comment on those items, but if you can't wait, or you've got something not on our agenda, feel free to make public comment at this time. Just ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes and tell us your name and address. Is there any public comment at this point in the meeting? No one is coming forward, so we'll close the public comment period and move first to our presentation by Off the Streets. If you would, please go to the microphone and please introduce everybody so we get everybody's name.
Sure. I'm Julie Kerber. I'm a volunteer with Off the Streets. I call myself the Community Outreach Director because I love talking about Off the Streets. Ken Kerber, he's my husband. He's the Executive Director. We've got Jim Mack, who is the Board Chair of Off the Streets, and Dina Bishop, who is our Case Manager with Off the Streets.
Very good. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, let me start by asking the question. It's rhetorical, of course, but how many of you would love to end homelessness if you could right now, right this very minute? I think we all would. On any given night, as you well know, there are 600 people who are considered homeless. What Off the Streets focuses on, however, are the chronically homeless. That means a person who has been homeless for 12 months or more over a 3-year period. That group is estimated at around 100, but based on what we see every day, we know that that is an underestimate and we need to find a solution. So we began as a nonprofit in January of 2022 with the sole mission of serving the chronically homeless and opening a low barrier shelter. So if you have severe mental illness, developmental disabilities, physical disabilities, addiction, or have endured generational poverty, the likes of that has left you with no known social skills, you have very few places to go in Billings, Montana. There aren't many who can withstand the rigors of a programmatic shelter. When I say there aren't many, I mean of those that we serve. They've been living in fight or flight mode for so long that it is a challenge just to take care of their basic needs. And that is why Off the Streets exists. And that's why we walk alongside these folks. It fills a definite gap in our community. So I want to make it clear that we are not in competition with the Montana Rescue Mission. We serve two entirely different populations. So they serve a population where you may have a job loss, you may have a medical emergency, you're used to being housed, and you go into that programmatic shelter and you bounce right back. We serve those who are at square one. So they need help doing pretty much everything. They may not even have an ID to their name. Even basic things that you and I take for granted, they need help with. One gentleman that we helped literally grew up on the streets. He has no known family, no one to shepherd him in life. And so we stepped into that role. He would never survive a regimented program, and that's why we are different. That's why we exist. If we didn't, he and those like him would still be on the street today. So how does Off the Streets work? Our founder, Craig Bartle, cast a vision for what we do. He's since taken a step back because he's focusing more on transitional housing at the present time, but he explains it very, very well. And so we thought we would let him and our case manager, Dina Bishop, show us why Off the Streets is different, and we have a little video.
So thankfully, we were able to open 2 shelter rooms in December of last year. You know, just wanting to start small. We had a room, a men's room with 6 beds, a women's room with 6 beds, and really began this sheltering people for free, so that people have a place that's warm, safe, and dry. And it's for the folks that can't be served at other places. You know, either they choose not to because they don't feel welcome, but by and large, it's because they're just not able to get into those rooms. But we started that, and we have seen this huge success. When you look at the numbers, the percentages of people that just in that small little room of 6 people and 6 people that move through that program rapidly, like within 30 days to 45 days, all of a sudden, they're well on their way to becoming housed. And I say, this is working. Every day we try and help people best we can to take one step forward to whatever better is for them, right? So maybe that's getting an ID, maybe that's getting connected with a therapist, maybe that's getting the medical help that they desperately need, right? Maybe that's working on their addiction. And then little by little, we try to get small little steps forward, because you're not going to get big steps, but you're going to see some small steps, and then celebrating those, right? Celebrating those steps, saying good job. You know, you got your ID, good job. You've been taking your medication for a month. It's just helping people in a multitude of ways. Maybe feel better about themselves. Maybe have hope for once, right? We fill a gap because that person that's on the sidewalk on First Avenue South, that person isn't, their options are very limited on where they can go, very limited. If you're a landlord, you're not renting to them. Not gonna do it, and rightly so, right? If you're a service provider who says, hey, you're doing this wrong, you don't follow these rules, you're hard to handle, you're hard to manage, you drop the F-bomb all the time, whatever, we can't serve you anymore. This is what they're used to hearing. This is why you see them there, right? If you knew the people that you were serving, the people that are chronically homeless, the people that are sleeping on the street, if you truly knew them, they want to be housed. They want to be housed. I mean, it's not like they're like, I'm dying to sleep on the sidewalk tonight. No. What changes your indifference or looking at somebody and saying, you need to change your life. What changes that is once you know them. So even though you may be strung out on fentanyl, whatever, meth, whatever, you're strung out, you're drunk, whatever, you're high, you're just laying there in a mess. Imagine that person, at least in the eyes of God, is priceless.
Off the Streets gives people an opportunity to love and be loved. There's so many stories of individuals who maybe thought it was done for them, that it was the end of the road, and they start to see hope, and to me that's a miracle.
This is what Off the Streets really shines, really takes the time to get to know that person. And once you do that, then all of a sudden the person sees that people care, number one, and all of a sudden they start to trust you. So trust is established, and now I'm honest with you. So maybe I came in and I said, I don't have any problems, right? I have no problems, but I just need a place to stay. And that's probably true of most people, right? Because I don't trust you, I'm not going to tell you the whole truth, right? I'm going to hide, right? I'm going to hide. I'm going to put a mask on. But over time, we build relationship with that individual, and over time what you see is the mask comes off. Once we know the truth, we're able to connect that person with the real help that they need, instead of always having to buy the lie or guess what the problem is, that people just come forward. And I think that relationship is one of the keys to helping people get off the street and permanently housed, because it doesn't stop there. Once they become housed, hopefully you've done a good enough job of building relationships so that when they struggle in that permanent house, they circle back, right? They circle back and say, I'm struggling, I need help. I need my friends again, right? I need my friend. I need you to talk me off the ledge because I'm thinking about doing this, and if I do, I'll become unhoused. And so that relationship is key. And to see the successes, to say that, so that if we can just cookie cutter that and make that something that we can continue to do for people in a bigger way, you'll see less people on the streets.
So the beautiful news is, since we taped that video a little more than a month ago, Off the Streets put the finishing touches on 2 additional rooms to expand our capacity to 24 people, and we were able to do it before the bitter cold moved in. It was a complete and utter leap of faith, but I mean, it has been successful. We rely 100% on community support, and so that's where that leap of faith came in. At the end of the year, we got word that an anonymous donor wanted to set up a small endowment for us to help us carry our mission into the future. So I just have to say, it's amazing for us to be in this position after just 1 year, of being open. Why is this work critical? Well, as Dina and Craig mentioned, when Off the Streets provides shelter for someone who is chronically homeless, we don't just provide a warm bed, a warm meal, and a warm shower. We provide that human connection. Our case manager, Dina Bishop, sits down with each one of our residents to talk about what their goals are, what their dreams are, and then it's her job to connect them with one of the 20 different service agencies that we've established a connection with. And we just never knew that that kind of collaboration could be possible, but it is indeed worthy. As a result, the stay in emergency shelter isn't long, as Craig mentioned. Women stay an average of 19 days, and men stay an average of 40 days. Since we opened our doors, we have sheltered 138 people, 109 in 2024 to be exact, and of that number, we have helped exactly 50% of them find more stable housing. Now keep in mind, these are the chronically homeless. These are the hardest population to serve. Now, helping shelter residents find employment is another one of our successes. Of those we've served, 44% have gone on to find and keep a job. And take, for instance, 35-year-old Adam, who spent 6 years on the street. We helped him land a job at Sassy Biscuit, and then he worked his way up. Today, he's in a management role, and it's beautiful because when shelter residents then come in, he helps them get jobs. And so we're happy to report, after 6 years on the street, not only has he moved up to management, making a more livable wage, but he has been in stable housing for 9 months, which is just, in my opinion, a miracle. And I could go on and on with different success stories. There are so many of them. So right now, it costs about $531 a month to house one person in our emergency shelter room. That pays for a person's bed, incidentals, and most importantly, their case management. We are oftentimes the very last stop for these folks. They have been to every other agency, every other shelter, and if we house an individual, it can truly be the difference between life and death, success, or continued life on the streets. So with that, I'd like to turn things over to my husband, Ken, the executive director, on where we go from here.
First, I'd like to thank you so much for letting us share what Off the Streets is and how we can help our community. We've had a bit of a baptism by fire, but we are learning that housing individuals, providing case management, and connecting them with community resources is the formula that works. No day is the same. Every problem is complex and different, but we have creative thinkers who are willing to tackle each day with the human being before us in mind.
We understand the city's dilemma. You have limited resources. You see the problem, but aren't quite sure how to address it. We understand that. In spring of 2023, we had a feasibility study done on the Yellowstone Paper Company building and had our eyes on purchasing it. The plan involved using the bottom floor for an emergency shelter, laundry facilities, showers, a commercial kitchen, plus 2 separate retail spaces to serve not only as a bridge to the community, but also a revenue stream to fund our emergency shelter. The second floor was designed for transitional living for women, the third transitional housing for men. While the study was just an outline, we believe rents from the building would fund between 50 to 60% of our operations. In March of 24, we had an investor who was willing to purchase the building for us. The deal fell through, and he ended up having a catastrophic health event, which ended our partnership plans. While we continue to look at that property as a possibility, we realized the need to cast a wider net and look at all opportunities. It's our desire to be along or near First Avenue South in close proximity to other service providers so our guests don't have to walk as far for meals or health care. So why are we here? For one, we'd love for you to understand what we do and how we have been successful, that we are a partner in solving the problem, and to ask for your creative insight in working with us. And how can you do that? I've got just a few rhetorical questions for you to consider. Is there a creative way to use TIF funds to help us renovate a building? Can we potentially look at community development block grant funds to help with case management? Can we be woven into the crisis response unit and serve as that place the CRU can take the chronically homeless? Could public safety mill levy funds be used to help us with our operations? We know that there was some money left over on the table last year. Could we talk about tapping into those funds since we are housing the chronically homeless and sheltering them from the elements? There are plots of land along 6th Avenue South that the city owns. Would the city be willing to gift us this land to help us jumpstart the construction of a low-barrier shelter with transitional living also on site? If gifted this land, we could use the land as equity to build and would begin the process of securing additional funds immediately. It would be a major step forward to help us address an issue that's plagued in the city. We know you can't answer these questions today, but it is our dream to sit down one day, hopefully soon, to work on this plan. Ideally, this is our dream, to have an emergency shelter with at least 80 beds and room for expansion. To have a day center to help with downtown loitering, giving people a place to be and stay warm. To have transitional living on site. We have found that while at the 4th Avenue Inn, that the transitional living component has been key in giving the shelter residents hope. The transitional living residents really shepherd the shelters and show them that their more stable housing isn't just a dream, but it's a reality. We also have seen what can only be described as sort of a family relationship that develops between the transitional living and the residents and our shelter guests. The day center at the 4th Avenue Inn is where they both gather. They gather for meals, they gather for Bible study, they gather for their addiction and recovery meetings, and they gather just to play games or watch TV. It's a support system that they've never had before. We would also like to have the other services on our campus. The Community Crisis Center, Riverstone's Health Care for the Homeless, the Mental Health Center, along with Addiction and Recovery Case Management. We have partnerships with caseworkers now, so we feel like we could make this happen. Riverstone has served our population on site at the 4th Avenue Inn, and the Community Crisis Center is a significant referral agency. We share all this because we believe the city can play a part in our growth. How? That would take more meetings, more brainstorming sessions, but we would love to have a seat at the table with you and try to solve this problem. We know downtown safety depends on it. We chatted with Chief St. John about the time his officers spend on calls dealing with the chronically homeless. We'd love to be that place for the officers to drop off individuals who need our help with no strings attached, no paperwork, and no additional time for an officer. We know economic development depends on working to solve this issue. 20,000 people commute downtown every day to work. They need to feel safe. A vibrant community depends on it. Just recently, Schreiner was on the Big Sky Economic Development podcast talking about safety downtown. This is what she had to say. We do have a population that is underserved here. We're living unhoused. People who are dealing with mental health crisis, people who are dealing with substance abuse disorder, we're not taking the time as a community to engage with them in a way that they need to be. She went on to ask, how can we find a way to meet these individuals where they need, and then find them the services that are appropriate for them. And this is exactly what the mission of Off the Streets is, to provide emergency shelter, walk alongside that individual, and use our connections in the community to get them the services they need to move forward in life. As Julie mentioned, half the people we have served have taken our help and have moved on to create a better life for themselves. So at this time, we're more than happy to take any questions. Julie, Jim, or Dina, we're all available.
Ken, thank you very much, and thank you for the quality of your presentation. I'm sure the council members will have questions. Can I just suggest before I do open it up for questions, though, that you sold yourselves short a little bit, because the four of you really have amazing professional background and lived experience background. Can you just tell a little bit who you are, because that's relevant to this whole proposition?
Well, me and the board, we don't come from the nonprofit world. I'm a businessman. Jim is a physician. The board are also business professionals within the city. Julie, her work in media in the past, and Dina, our case manager, is the person who really understands this problem, because she's the one that has lived it, and moved all the way through, and is such a resource. And I could let her do the talking, but Dina is really the secret sauce in this whole thing. She just scoops these people up. She loves them, and she just moves them forward. It's an amazing thing to see. And that answers your question.
Good enough. I didn't.
He's too humble. He's too humble. When he said he's a business consultant, and so he's helped multi-million-dollar companies get in the black and move their systems forward. So when I look at his experience, and I know he's my husband and I'm biased, but I think that taking a look at this problem from a really different set of eyes could be the thing that changes things for Billings.
Very good, thank you. And Julie is the publisher of the Yellowstone Valley Women
Yes.
magazine, which I'm sure you've all seen. So thank you very much. I didn't want us to finish the night and not have that basic foundation. So council members, questions? Councilmember Shaw?
Thanks. Thank you for being here and presenting to us. It's really great to hear what you're doing. I really liked your kind of suggestions at the end of things for us to think about. I think often my first question to people is, well, what would you like council to do? And so I think you answered that. My question for you guys is, the one that jumped out to me is the identification of some plots of land along 6th Avenue South. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we're in the process, the city is, of going through and identifying pieces of land like that might go up for sale or out for an RFP or something like that in the future. Are you looking to build a new building? Is that the ultimate goal? And if so, do you have funding potentially lined up for that? Or are you looking to, because you were looking at the Yellowstone paper company, you said.
Yellowstone Paper Company.
Can you just clarify that a little bit?
So we had the feasibility study, and the feasibility study came in, and it matched perfectly what we want. And again, the focus here is to have the emergency shelter, low barrier shelter, which is new to the city. There is not a permanent low barrier shelter in the city, and that's what we would be. And we've learned that tying it in with the traditional housing on site, so they can interact. And quite frankly, some people go to transitional housing, and then they'll need the emergency housing not long after that. And so to keep the people together is important for us. And so that building fit our needs perfectly. It so far has remained out of reach for us, and the problem gets bigger, and we need to maybe refocus a little bit. And if there's opportunities for land or other buildings that can come our way that we could use to keep that focus of an emergency low barrier shelter with transitional housing attached on the same campus, we just have to pursue those options as well. The city needs us to move, and we can't wait just for them.
I think just to tag team on that, The reason why we mentioned that plot of land is because it's 0.4 miles to Riverstone and 0.6 miles to St. Vincent de Paul, both of which play a critical role in the lives of the folks that we serve. So we mentioned that as a possibility because if the city were to gift us that land, it would be beautiful to use the equity of that land to then find a construction loan and start that process. Whether we could do it all at once or build it in phases, we haven't really fully investigated that because we always had our eyes set on the Yellowstone paper building. But if you said, hey, we might be interested in pursuing something like that, we would jump on board and get bids for construction and see exactly what we're dealing with. We also want to be able to build transitional housing to the scale that will provide us the biggest return on investment to help us fund our emergency low barrier shelter so that we don't have to be such a burden on the community for fundraising, and we won't get that donor fatigue of like, well, you're going to ask us for money again, and you're going to ask us for money again. We want to try to find that secret formula of how many rooms do we provide that's going to offer the best bang for our buck in return to pay for what we need to get done in this community.
Yeah, that makes sense. We've seen, now blanking on who did the presentation for us, Tom probably knows, that they really identified that as a gap in Billings, that transitional housing piece. So to me, I think you've nailed it in terms of what a huge need for our community. I would just say, I think it actually would go the other way, is that the city, just so you know what's going on, is that the city would probably say, okay, we have this piece of land that we're willing to sell, or come to us with a proposal, and then we would consider that, just so you have that in your minds of being prepared to do that potentially this spring if that opportunity comes up.
Very good, thank you. Councilmember Kennedy, Councilmember Boyette?
One of the things you said tonight is that you would partner with the Crisis Center. One of the biggest problems with the Crisis Center is it's a 23-hour drop-off center, but there's no services and no follow-up that ends up happening with it. I like the idea that you're housing people and you're addressing the problem and you're addressing the next day and the next day and the next day, because that's really what has to take place. Because we're seeing at the Crisis Center, it's a recidivism that's every other night going back to the Crisis Center. The taxpayers pay for that. We put in money to the Crisis Center. The hospitals do too, but the taxpayers put in a lot of money there. We also put in money to the hub, which was taken away. And there is some dollars there that Yellowstone County has that we had passed years ago for the hub and transitional helping people and things like that. So there is some funding sources that you'll have to go to the county and talk to them about. But if there's a possibility of you putting the Crisis Center in with this and then receiving some of those dollars, I think it would get you on the second, third, or fourth step to making this a reality.
We've had some of those little discussions with Marcy.
It just makes sense to me. We serve the same population. They're not a shelter, and they don't want to be a shelter. It's not what they're supposed to be, and so I think they should just be right next to the shelter, and the people can all be served. I mean, those that are in crisis need the crisis center. Those that just need shelter need us.
But it's only for 23 hours.
Right.
It's not ongoing services. The same people come back. So your crisis is every other day, and you're spending more and more dollars. They were partnered with you, you could do the follow-up, and we wouldn't see them over and over again. The other piece I really like is what was happening at St. Vincent de Paul last summer and the tent city. We're enabling people, we're not helping them. And so eventually, when people were asked to leave the sidewalks and things like that, you're right, they had nowhere to go. But we shouldn't have let that happen. We need a place for them to go. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. Doctor, go ahead, and then Councilmember Boyette.
I'd just like to add something to that, just to your point about enabling, because I think one criticism that's been leveled against us when we've talked about low barrier shelter has been, aren't you guys going to be enabling all these folks if you just put a roof over their head? Are they going to start using, in relative safety and not make any changes to their life? So it's important to point out that, two things. Number one, the concept of housing first, and you may all be familiar with that already, so I won't belabor the point, but there's a definite concept in homelessness services circles of housing first. There's good evidence to support the effectiveness of that. Randomized controlled studies that look at individuals who receive housing first, getting off the streets faster, and also staying in stable housing longer than people that are treated in conventional ways. And then the other thing to say is that housing first doesn't mean housing only. So if you just put a roof over somebody's head, some of those criticisms may be totally appropriate, but our recipe, our secret sauce, as we like to say, is the relationship piece as well. And so yes, it's important to house people because that immediately gets the monkey off their back of, where am I going to sleep tonight? And is somebody going to stab me when I'm sleeping out on the sidewalk? And all the bazillion, crises that go through their mind. So that then enables them to at least be more receptive to poking and prodding to move in the direction that will make their lives better. It doesn't guarantee that they will change their lives, but it certainly creates the fertile soil in which that can happen. So as we look at providing low barrier housing, or low barrier shelter, it's really important for you all to realize that this is it's a wraparound services kind of idea. It's a whole several layers of interventions and people involved with the help of our community partners. Hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Councilor Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. Over the years, I've donated money to the Montana Rescue Mission, who wants to help people, the Salvation Army that wants to build tiny houses, Family Promise, who wants to help people get housing, St. Vincent de Paul, everyone. Why do we need another one when we have people doing it? That's a question. Why can't you join with other organizations instead of having another entity all by itself? Just, that's a question that we get asked a lot of times is, why do we have to have 5 or 6 different people basically doing kind of the same thing, but why not work together?
Well, our goal is to work together. We would never say that we want to take on this solution and we're the one, jump on with us, and we've got the only good, best idea. Our goal is to work with people, but I think that what, you listed 5 or so very, very good organizations, and I would say all of them are very good at what they do. None of them are dedicated, and their sole thing is working with the chronically homeless. The chronically homeless is a gap. This is, why do you need to add somebody? Because there's nobody doing it. Honestly, if this problem didn't exist, Dina would obviously be doing it because this is what she's built for. But the 3 of us would go back to our normal lives. The problem exists with these wonderful organizations that are together. So why doesn't the Salvation Army do it? That's not their mission. Why doesn't the St. Vincent de Paul do it? It's not their mission. So our mission is to get in there and have the low barrier shelter and then pull everybody together. I couldn't agree with you more. The current providers, sometimes they don't work well together. We're new to this, so we might be, bright-eyed and not really understand it. But our goal is to just work with everybody. Because really, working with the Montana Rescue Mission, we could have people off the street, and they're very good at getting people on their feet and back out in their lives. But there are people that don't work and play well, and those people are children of God and need us too.
Ken, if I could follow, or Dina, go ahead.
Between 2007 and 2023, chronic homelessness went up 551% in Montana. So it doesn't have to be either or. When we bring people into off the streets. Sometimes they weren't successful at the Montana Rescue Mission just because that's the way that they didn't respond well to that program. Maybe it was too rigid, or we're not truly a low barrier, but we try and keep the barriers as low as we can currently. And sometimes people don't do well in a setting where there's so many people as well. So having more services and being able to, we have an open door policy at Off the Streets where the Tumbleweed can come in, the mental health center can come in, Rimrock, all the different agencies can come in and they can meet with people and they can it's a collaboration between many different agencies, and it makes it easier access for the individuals who maybe can't make it to an appointment. They have a hard time getting to appointments. So it's a good thing to have more services, not less.
Thank you. If I can ask a question, I'll hand it then cut to, excuse me?
I said if you want good outcomes and you want people to be successful, having more services available to them.
Very good, thank you. If I can follow up on that, and then I'll hand it to Councilmember Niche, had a question. You made the point, I think it was Ken earlier on, that in the case of the Off the Streets and the Rescue Mission, you're serving two different populations, two different sets of needs. The Rescue Mission, many of us are longtime supporters of a great organization that's got a 100-year history, and boy, we would be in great trouble without them. They do a great job, but they are more programmatic. They, for lack of a better word, require more of their residents, and as you said, that's not going to fit for everybody. That's been the case traditionally, and there's a great need for what they're doing, obviously. We'd all like to see everybody involved in one of those programs. However, I wonder if somebody can comment, just because, and I'm just asking out of ignorance, how the mission's new emergency shelter component in the basement, which they say does not include those kind of programmatic requirements. Why isn't that a new chapter in our community that will, I don't want to say solve the problem, but dramatically reduce the problem, make the need for off the streets much less? And I don't want you to rag on the rescue mission, obviously, but it is kind of an 800-pound gorilla in the room, right? So can somebody address how we might expect the new emergency facility in the basement of the rescue mission to help with this problem or not? And I think they had a flood. I'm not sure what the status of their facility is now. Maybe that's all taken care of. But if anybody can comment on that.
I can tell you this, that the feedback from people on the street has been more positive about what's going on in the emergency of the MRM. They get to stay longer. They get to come in, I believe the time is like 5:30, so they're coming in earlier. They're staying longer. The facilities are better. But I don't know if they've changed their policy on that time limited. So previously in the past, I've heard that the stay was 14 days in the emergency shelter. So if you're not moving up and being able to, and this is, again, I don't have inside information over there. I'm just going off feedback from people that have been there, but you're limited in your time in the emergency shelter. So if you can't pass a drug test and you don't have Medicaid, then you might not be able to stay there. So then what do you do after 14 days? And so that's why really a low barrier shelter is needed for the people that it may take a little bit longer to get on that process to recovery, mental health and addiction. So that's why a low barrier shelter, it does take people time. It honestly takes time. It takes time to go from being on the street for years to to starting to feel a little bit better, to feeling confident enough to go out and look for work, to addressing your addiction. I mean, so 14 days, very hard to do.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. I did have a question for Ken because you made a comment I didn't quite understand when you mentioned something about someone doesn't play well. I wasn't sure if you were talking about the people on the streets are not playing well or organizations. What did you mean by that comment about?
Well, maybe that was a little too flippant, but yeah, you know, people that when they're homeless, they can be irritable. They can get themselves in trouble with people that are trying to help them.
Okay.
And so they can get themselves thrown out of places that people really do want to help them, but they can still get thrown out.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I was here when Chuck first had the initial shelter, off the street shelter, and it was a no barrier shelter. I visited him a few weeks afterwards, and he said, "Yeah, we've changed that from a no barrier to a low barrier." He had to kick some people out because of their behavior and things like that. So I understand. It sounds to me like, and again, I haven't talked to the rescue mission, but I understand that their barrier may be a little higher than yours. And so yours is lower, and so it does serve a little different population for a period of time. But going back to some of the questions what the mayor mentioned and what Councilmember Boyett said, I mean, we have lots of different organizations out there. It sounds to me initially where you're at, you're serving a really good population that maybe not be met by other organizations. But as you wanted to grow, you're talking about some things that may be duplication of transitional housing. As I understand, the Rescue Mission has some transitional housing, and CLDI and some of the other organizations may have some of that. So is there, what have you done to talk to some of these? I heard, I think it's Dina, mentioned that she doesn't really know what's going on at the Rescue Mission. Have you guys been over to the Rescue Mission? Have you met with them and said, okay, this is the kind of programs we have, this is where we can't fit, or have they said to you, we want nothing to do with you, stay away, we're not going to accept any of your people who you're able to pull up and help out of the fact, and where they get to a point that maybe now they can fit a program within rather Rescue Mission or St. Vincent or some other, Salvation Army program? Are you looking to make sure that all of those are part of this?
Yeah, so if we're full, we've brought people over to the mission, and they've actually brought people to us recently. One individual had a service animal or an animal that couldn't be there. So that really we are trying to really collaborate with organizations, even the Montana Rescue Mission, where maybe there wasn't that communication in the past, to better serve the individuals. Because if we're not talking and we're not able to call over to the crisis center or call the MRM and say, I called them today to see if they were full. Somebody had thought that they were full and they were not. So we are trying to open those lines of communication so that we can better serve the individuals.
So just a quick follow-up on that. So do you believe that your transitional housing piece that you're looking for in the future, and I believe it's the Yellowstone paper complex you were talking about, would actually be needed as far as additional transitional housing over and above what the Montana Rescue Mission or other organizations are actually providing?
Yeah, so I do believe, I believe that the transitional living there, they had 24, 25 units, 29, sorry. And we're seeing people come through our shelter fairly quickly and get the job, but the housing doesn't come through in that time through Homefront or through HRDC's rapid rehousing program when they have funding. So yes, for them to move forward and to continue growing, they want to pay for their own place, but there's limited places out there that they can afford. And so at the 4th Avenue Inn, we're really lucky that we've been able to kind of provide them with a step up, but it's limited. There's so limited affordable housing. If you work a full-time job at 40 hours a week, or minimum wage, you are going to make about $1,400 with the average rent being around $900 for a 1-bedroom. So you're really, really limited in your, you need the transitional housing.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to piggyback on that. You talked about the other organizations that had transitional living. Well, there's just not enough. As Dina mentioned, I mean, CLDI has 24 units in one building. They've got 27 units in another location. And then you've got the rescue mission with 29. If you add that all up, and there's 7,000 to 8,000 people waiting for low-income housing assistance, there's clearly a need. And I think the beautiful thing about Off the Streets is what Dina mentioned, is that graduation process. Because you come from the Off the Streets emergency shelter, you get a job. And then the next thing that everyone gets to witness and celebrate is you get to move into your own paying room. And we have just seen beautiful things happen when we can celebrate those victories and they're on campus. So like Craig mentioned in that video, when they struggle, Dina is right there. You know, the person that shepherded them from the very first minute that they came in from off the street, Dina is there. And she knows then where to move them so that they can get the help they need in order to stay stable so they don't end up back on the street. So I hope that answered it.
It does. Amira, you don't mind another
Sure,
question?
go ahead.
So you mentioned a couple of examples, which it's great to hear how you've made changes in people's lives. It's always great to see success stories. Have you measured your measurements and stuff? Have you looked at some of the original Off the Streets was helping? Are you still tracking all of that? And then really, what is the standard for you to see people who are really in homes, permanent housing, and that what's your goal to see, or what's really the measurement to generate to see, is this program working or not working, that we're successful long-term wise to really reduce the number of people who are having to come back to and start over again, or coming on the streets and things like that, to really reduce it?
Well, I'm going to let somebody else jump in after me, but I think that we haven't been in existence that long. But to say that we have helped 50% find more stable housing and 44% find a job, that's huge. That's huge. And so, you know, as Craig had mentioned in the video, like if we can do this on a larger scale and witness that same success, there will be a day when you look around Billings and say, where did all the homeless people go? That's how I feel. I think we need more of a track in order to kind of, but I think the statistics that we've seen in a year are remarkable. So.
I just would say that the original Off the Street shelter back in 2020 was not the same thing as we are, just so everybody understands that. That was actually a result of the COC. It was a program of the Continuum of Care in Yellowstone County. And so we as an organization were not in existence then. We haven't been tracking those same people to directly answer your question, but Craig has told us just informally that it was really rare for someone to leave that facility and enter stable housing afterward. Now, granted, that facility didn't have wraparound services there as we are, having at the current time and looking at having in the future. So that's a major difference. But I just wanted to point out those difference details. And then going back to your previous question for just a second about collaboration, I just wanted to point out for the record that we've had direct meetings with executive directors of Montana Rescue Mission, Gratitude in Action, Mental Health Center, Family Promise, just thinking of who else has been in there. We met with Pastor Lisa Harmon of First Congregational Church. So we're really spreading this around and trying, of course, Marcy Neary as well from the Crisis Center, really spreading it around, trying to really understand what each of these organizations does, let them know what we're doing. We've had some really fruitful discussions about sharing resources and moving forward in a collaborative way. So I just wanted you to be aware of that as well. Thank you.
Very good. Other questions from members of council, Councilmember Gillick and Councilmember Rupsis?
you raised a lot of ideas and things at the end in terms of how could the city perhaps help. I'd love to have a hard copy or I guess a list of some sort, if you could send that, as well as a copy of your presentation. It was very helpful. Presentation was very helpful. It's always nice to see rather than to show rather than tell. So I appreciate that, and I know that I need something to react to rather than just a verbal list. I didn't take copious notes as I should. So if you could send that, that would be great.
Good. Thank you. Councilor Ripsis?
Thanks, Mayor. I want to commend you all on the work that you're doing. And you mentioned the COC, the Continuum of Care. I know you've been involved with them. I would encourage you to continue that, because that is, like you said, that true collaboration of all the agencies. We've gotten through a lot of the kind of angst and turmoil of the past, and the COC moving forward, it's getting a lot of good positive energy, better collaboration with that group of agencies, and also some tighter integration with the Substance Abuse Connect, where there's a lot of overlap there, and the organizations, the continuums are starting to work together a lot better, and so there's a lot of overlap with your clients in both of those areas. And so I'd encourage you to continue working down that path and being involved. I think you're on the HIMIS system.
Yes.
Yes, so you're tracking all those, all the people participating in your program, so we're using the same consistent measure as other agencies in the continuum are using. And so thank you for doing that. The one challenge that we often have is lots of nonprofits coming to council and say, hey, we want a slice of this really small pie that you have. And so I know the Continuum's focus right now as an organization and their strategic plan is on a permanent supportive housing, which is a variation of what you're doing with just a little bit different target as well. But working through the Continuum to bring those asks to us as a collaboration, to me, is more effective than one nonprofit getting up here, because then we're picking and choosing winners, right? Whereas if the Continuum brings a project forward and says, look, our entire collaboration of agencies together supports this project, and we would like to see council support these things in these ways across all the needs of the community, to me is I think a more effective way to make an ask. I am certainly open and will be ready to support whatever we can do in this area, because I think it is an area that we as a city need to be more involved in. I've tried to do that personally as I've been sitting here on council, but I encourage you to come together as part of that group and bring those to us and make those asks as a community rather than an individual nonprofit, because that's the way I think the city can best allocate our scarce resources. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Further questions from any council member? Okay, let's open up for public comment at this point. Is there anybody with us today who would like to comment on item number 1, the presentation by Off the Streets? If so, please make your way to the little podium up there.
Oh. Okay, comments on number 1. This is for housing, right?
Yeah, go ahead and get your way to the microphone there.
Yeah, I'm 35 too.
And please introduce yourself.
Oh, my name's Warren Lee Usry, 4145 Jasper, retired military. Have any of you lived on the street? Yes, no?
Excuse me?
Left outside, but yes, I unhoused situation.
Not bad neighborhood for a long time. Freeze in the winter.
Warren, if you would just address your comments to the council and
Speak in the microphone.
How many months?
and speak to the microphone, otherwise nobody will be able to hear. Thanks.
How many months are you guys gonna allow people to stay there?
We don't have a time limit.
No time limit. Okay, that's a good thing. One, me and a buddy stayed in Big 5 Motel. It took us 6 months to get out of that motel. When you get a job, it's 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks to the first paycheck. By the time you get first and last, and utilities opens, all open, say a year, 2 years. That's the way to go. You said requirements. What requirements do they have?
They can't be a harm to themselves or somebody else. That's the only barrier.
Are you gonna have like a big room like this, a whole bunch of big communal?
Warren, part of the problem is when you're asking them questions, we don't hear what gets said. And this is really a time for us, for you to address us. So if you
Okay.
would just do it that way, and then if you can pose questions and we can get some answers later. Are you good?
I got another question for you. Just get my notes right here quick. Oh, actually, that's all I had for them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, 510% was put out. 510%. It's gonna go a lot higher. Just with Trump going on 25% tariffs with Canada, Canada's already threatened to cut off half of our oil coming into the United States. How many places are you guys gonna do?
Again,
Well,
just
how
to
many
make your
places-
comments to us, if you would.
Okay. For you guys, are you gonna provide security? You have people coming off the street, drunk, stoned, or even just too many bugs where they were sleeping, fighting with one another. Are you gonna have like cameras and stuff in the place for security, police to back you up? Single housing is a good thing. My neighbor, she's 67, living in one of your assisted living places, just a room, type of deal thing. She couldn't afford the house, not enough Social Security. I recommend getting 20 of these. The mission is always full. You got 5 to 10 people at night being, there's a whole lot of us that don't even try to go in the mission because it's always full. Your 23-hour place, 24-hour place, you need about 5 of these. That's all I have for you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Very good. Any other public comment on this item? Any other public comment on this item? No one's going forward, so we'll close the public comment period on item number 1. Council, anything else from you before we move to item number 2? Nobody is indicating anything, so we'll move on to item number 2, our 2025 housekeeping amendments to the zoning code. Our zoning coordinator, Nicole Cromwell, is our presenter. Welcome, Nicole.
Good evening, Council.
You'll need to keep your
It
voice
is,
up
but you
and yeah,
just
speak
really
right
have
into
to
that
talk
microphone.
close.
Okay,
Thank
I'm gonna talk close.
Oh, much
There you go
better.
for that.
Thank you.
All right, so 4 years ago, we adopted a new code. And we have been working with this new code. And this is the last scheduled set of code updates after that new code adoption. And if I gave you the wrong impression in my staff report that these were all just minor corrections, errors, I'm sorry. There are a couple of substantive code amendments that are in that draft. Probably based on what I understand about ordinances, we'll probably make an ordinance just for those errors and then an ordinance for the more substantive ones individually. So it probably won't come to you as one ordinance when it comes back to you for public hearing. So what are those substantive changes? One of them is a result of the zoning commission recommending or going to recommend denial on a zone change for a particular parcel that was really small, surrounded by other corridor mixed-use 1 zoning, next to a neighborhood and a public park. And the reason they asked for the zone change to CMU2 was solely because they wanted to do car sales. Car sales are not allowed in the CMU1 zone district. The zoning commission thought that it would be a good fix, a relief to this pain point in the code, to allow that use by special review approval of the city council. Because they thought this lot, based on the size of the dealership, independent, small owner, not a lot of inventory, that they move through their lot on a regular basis, that it would be okay at this location, except the zoning code didn't allow it. as a allowed by right use. So that's one of the substantive amendments that's coming to you. The second one is based on like the last year of history with staff inquiries about using shipping containers to repurpose them for different uses. Not just storage, but for things like coffee kiosks or drive-throughs, or I've even had people ask about converting them to dwellings or for office buildings, small, really tiny offices. And our code as currently written basically says no go. You cannot repurpose a shipping container for anything. You can't use it as a structural element and then upgrade it to meet building code requirements. And it is difficult to do in Montana. There is a lot of energy code, heating and cooling codes, structural requirements, snow loads that are difficult to meet. It can be slightly cheaper than doing a stick-built or site-built structure, but not a whole lot. But people have innovative ideas. And so this amendment would allow that to happen if it meets the zoning district requirements and if it can meet the building code requirements for a structure. Probably the most that you would ever see this used for would be for the coffee kiosk or a really small office structure. The bigger they are or the more complex by putting them together, the more the cost to build them out is almost the same as building from scratch. So it probably won't be used a lot, but it allows that opportunity to exist. The third one is substantive insofar as that we used to have height exceptions allowed across all zoning districts in the old code for certain things like chimneys or elevator shaft extensions or antennas on top of people's homes or things like that. In this code, we only put it in the public zone district section of the code. We didn't put it in residential zones or commercial zones or industrial zones. So this is to add that exception back into the code that allows it, because it's not an occupied structure. We're not concerned about if somebody's chimney is 45 feet tall on their 3-story house, or let's say they have some sort of antenna on the top of their home, or if there's an elevator shaft on a mixed-use building that goes above the maximum height level. So that adds that back in there. It is substantive because it's not in there now. So that is the purpose of that, and I did get your suggestion on putting in the word approved before the words about administrative relief or a variance. So we'll add that language into the code. The fourth substantive amendment, in my opinion, there might be other ones that other people think are substantive, but the fourth one is to amend the definition of a manufactured home. In 2023, the legislature passed an amendment to the state law that took out the minimum floor area and what they call the type 1 designation, which had to do with roofing and siding materials and about the perimeter foundations. They took all of that out. So legally, the city can't have those designations in our local code anymore because the state law protects manufactured homes that were built to the HUD code at the time they were constructed. It doesn't protect manufactured homes that were built prior to July 1st, 1976, because those are considered, and I know this is a term of art, mobile homes, which don't meet the current HUD code standard for manufactured homes. So we take out that reference to a type 1 or a type 2, mirror the state law language about manufactured homes, what that requirement is, and then add on the sentence about manufactured home is not a mobile home as defined in state law. So we'll just mirror those things in our local code so we don't, get sideways with the state or with developers of those manufactured home parks. Another one that might be considered substantive is to expand the list of allowed uses in the public one zone districts. The mayor had a suggestion that we take out the reference to appropriate fees can be charged. I don't know why that was ever in there, other than to give the reader an idea that just because it's a public one district doesn't mean that everything is free. In other words, Yellowstone, the golf course at Yellowstone Club Estates, it's a private golf course, it's zoned public one. They're not going to let you play for free. They don't let you play for free at Par 3. They don't let you swim for free at Rose Park. So I think that was the reason for that reference, but I don't think we need it in there per se, because people will know when they go and try and play golf for free that they have to pay to get in or use those facilities. So we can remove that language out of the draft code. So the City Zoning Commission initiated these amendments on December 3rd. They have not been noticed for public hearings yet. That would happen next month. If you want additional changes to what has already been drafted before we go to public hearing, we can do that. You can do that by suggestions to staff tonight. If you want to add something to this list that's not in here now, you would have to initiate that at your meeting next Monday in order to get it into this cycle, this docket for public hearings in March. If you do it after January, the end of January, we can still get that done, but it would be in a separate set of hearings in April instead of March. So always open to your suggestions, changes to the code. We took a couple of today. You can certainly make those edits and get the draft finalized. Or if you choose, you can stick another pin in that set of changes and say, we'd like to do this.
Okay. Are you open for questions, Nicole, or you got more?
Up for questions.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start us off, and then Councilmember Bernice, on and then over on this side, on the shipping container issue. Can you just help us to understand, or help me to understand, how this works? This is a zoning set of zoning codes, which is basically a map, and how if the prohibition on using shipping containers goes away if they comply with building codes, it seems to me you have to have a crystal ball to look at that future constructed shipping container to determine whether it complies with the zoning code, or I'm sorry, the building code, before you can then approve it on the zoning side. How do you do that?
Together. All building permits, which would include a permit to convert or use a shipping container for a new structure, goes through a coordinated review with the city, including building officials, zoning, environmental, engineering, depending on what it is, public health. So we're all looking at the same plan at the same time. People ask for concept meetings. Let's say they have a great idea to use a bunch of these for transitional housing. We would come together and they would show us how they're going to meet the building code. They would show us how that proposed concept would meet the zoning code, and we could converse about whether that was okay or not okay, or not sure that really meets the zoning code, that sort of thing. So don't really need a crystal ball when we have a coordinated plan review, and we have concept meetings that we have all the time with people who have new ideas.
Okay, thank you. So all those approvals are happening simultaneously. Councilmember Neese and Councilmember Owen, Councilmember Gillick?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to stick on to the shipping container for a moment. So did I understand you correctly that shipping containers are now okay in residential zones?
No, they're not.
They're
In
not.
fact, they're not okay in any zone as anything other than a storage unit.
If,
And they're only allowed as a permanent placement in 3 different zones, and those are industrial, 1 and 2, and heavy commercial. And those are the ones that still have the lettering on the side. They're still the ones that say Maersk or Evergreen or what have you. And you will see those used on a temporary basis at many commercial locations because they don't have enough storage for seasonal stuff. So they pack those in there and they pull seasonal stuff out of those shipping containers during holiday seasons or during summer season. But they're constantly rotating those shipping containers on and off the property. They're not permanent.
okay, so even if they meet housing codes, they're not going to be allowed in housing districts.
It could be if they meet the zoning district building and siting standards. So if they can make that container that's retrofitted to be a housing unit meet the door and window requirements, to meet the roof requirements, to meet the build-to requirements. So it won't look anything like a shipping container when you get done because we have to insulate stuff here.
Yeah, I've seen.
So it's going to have siding that's not the raw steel on the outside.
Yeah, I've seen some of these structures, and where people make them into houses, and they sure look like shipping containers stacked up, and I'm sure they meet some kind of building code. But I guess I'm a little leery of approving it for that. But I'll leave that alone because maybe I'm the only one. Mayor, if I don't mind, I got a question regarding the first one you mentioned about the allowing car sales in CMU1. What was the reason why car sales were not allowed to begin with? I'd like to start there to find out what was the rationale through the recode that they said, hey, we don't want car sales in CMU1.
CMU1 lots typically are much smaller and not deep and share a property line with neighborhood zones or across an alley from a neighborhood zone. The CMU2 was intended to be much larger lots, typically surrounded all the way around by streets, not by alleys and streets. So this is the difference between West Park Plaza, which is a CMU2, surrounded completely by streets, and most of the, I guess we call it corridor mixed-use zoning now, but most of the zoning that's west of that location was converted from residential zoning to commercial zoning in the past, and it's not deep. And so there's a lot of uses that are available that don't require a lot of lot area, that don't have the kind of impacts that a car sales lot can have on those adjacent neighborhoods. I'm not saying we don't have them already in CMU1 zoning. Right now, those uses are protected as legally non-conforming uses. But if something were to happen, like they abandoned the use, all the cars went away, the building was vacated, and that lasted for more than a year, they couldn't bring another car sales business onto that property. So actually, creating the special review process allows you to weigh and judge and decide whether that lot, a CMU1 lot, is okay for car sales or not okay.
Okay.
Special review is not an allowed use. It's a use that you can overcome and say, look, what I'm going to do, and here's all the details of what I'm going to do on this lot, is going to be okay. And here's how I'm going to mitigate any potential impacts to the surrounding neighborhood.
okay, so the special review is, they have to prove that it belongs, correct? And it doesn't run with the land, so after they're done with doing their business, then that's gone. Do I understand that correctly, or does it stick with the land?
It stays with the land. You have considered in the past sunsetting a special review approval, but I've never seen that stick as a condition. Primarily because if they get the special review, they're gonna make a huge investment in that property. And to not continue that value forward, as a marketable use under those conditions that you approved would, I don't know, it'd be dicey.
Okay, Mayor, I have one more question if you don't mind.
And then Councilor Rowan.
Thank you. You mentioned in the manufactured homes, they're not allowed in commercial use. Do I understand that correctly?
Right, with one exception.
For manufactured home sales areas.
Right.
So here we just are changing the ordinance to allow car sales in CMU1, which is a commercial zone. And often you see these car dealers have very small offices. If we're going to be on CMU1, which is typically smaller lots, they're going to be a small little building. So why would we not allow manufactured homes to be offices on CMU1 for car sales? Why is it only manufactured home sales?
It has to do with the state adopted building code. It's the same code that the city adopts. The state law says that you can use a manufactured home for manufactured home sales at a manufactured home sales lot. Now, there are modular built buildings built to a different standard that can be used as office buildings on lots like car sales lots. But they're built to a different standard and they have to meet the commercial building code.
Okay, so they can still use modular offices, just not manufactured homes.
Right.
Thank you.
Councilor Rowan.
Thank you, Mayor. So Councilmember Denise's questions have raised a question for me, and then I have two other quick ones. And Nicole, have we in our zoning code, or do we need to in our zoning code, addressed any issues with the permitting of 3D printed facilities? I don't think they fall into the manufactured home settings, but I'm just wondering how we've addressed that given kind of where technology's going.
I don't believe we do, because 3D printed structures are completely governed by the building code.
Okay.
It doesn't absolve them of meeting the building and siding standards for whatever district they're going into.
But it doesn't need to be addressed here. Okay, so then fairly quickly, I hope, on the issue of this P1 district, I think your point is well taken, that we should signal to the public that fees can be charged. So I might just strike the word appropriate, because I agree with the mayor that that can invite some debate over what's appropriate, but acknowledging that even though these are a P1, they could charge fees, seems to be a reasonable approach to me.
Okay.
What I wanted to ask about was this amendment to provision 1704G, and then, although it's not included here, 1704H, which is the penalties. I don't think that we want to say that something may be a misdemeanor, because I think that is sort of whimsical. Maybe it's a crime, maybe it isn't. I think what you mean to say is that a violation may be punishable by, and then whatever sort of the misdemeanor language is. But we also have sort of a civil enforcement and a criminal enforcement. It seems like those two could be condensed together into a much clearer language, making it clear that in some cases this may be a civil fee, in other cases it might be a criminal charge with fees and the potential for imprisonment. And I think we could wrap those together in one neater, more clear statement, rather than this language of saying it may be a misdemeanor. Because if you violate it, it is a misdemeanor if charged as a misdemeanor, right? Like, we don't have this sort of ambiguity about some other category. It's not a felony.
Right.
So
The whole section of 1704 includes basically 9 different ways that the city can enforce a violation of the zoning code. Whether that's a violation of a condition of special review, or it's just a straight on violation. You've established a use that's not allowed in that zone district.
Right.
And right now, the confusion is between the opening paragraph of 1704, which says the city has a variety of ways that we can enforce this. And then in G, it says it is a misdemeanor. So there's confusion within the enforcement community of like, do I have to write a misdemeanor ticket? Or can I write an MI?
I believe you. I just don't think this has solved it. Because I think it's created a new whimsical thing that maybe it's a felony, which is, it's clearly not, right? So
No.
I think we wanna fix that language in a different way, is all I'm saying. And I would encourage Gina to weigh in on that.
Yeah, Councilor Cota, if I can ask Gina, because I had a similar conversation with her this morning,
Oh,
not
good, okay.
understanding, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, and who has the power to make that
Decide,
determination.
and under what circumstances.
It's assigned to the zoning coordinator. So Gina, I don't know if you wanted to, you were gonna look into that today, and I don't know if you had a chance or want to comment, but feel free if you did.
Yes, Mayor, I think that we can work on some language to clarify some of this. Generally, it's my understanding that when the code enforcement officers have determined there are violations and then they get to the point where they want to charge it as a misdemeanor, they consult with our office to do so. So I believe that those are charged by complaint by our office. Code enforcement officers don't issue criminal citations, so that addresses the issue we discussed this morning. And with regard to the language that Councilmember Owen just talked about, I think that we could insert some clarifying language there to just basically indicate that it may be charged or cited as a municipal infraction or a misdemeanor. I think that would probably clear that issue up, or something like that. We can visit offline about.
I would encourage us just to mirror state statute, sorry Gina, where appropriate, just say maybe punishable by up to, and grab whatever that language is.
It was my understanding that the reason for the edit, Nicole, correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason for the edit was just to clarify that there's the option of pursuing it as a municipal infraction or a misdemeanor. So, because at this point, any violation under this section of city code is considered a misdemeanor only. So we were just trying to open that up to both options, so we can clarify that, what that intent was.
It is unclear, just as a follow-up, it is unclear to me if A through H are escalations, or if they're listed in like no particular order.
No particular order.
Okay, because municipal infraction follows criminal, which is sort of curious.
It's a list.
Yeah.
It's
Anyhow, I would just suggest that we look at G and maybe H and see if they can't be condensed down and make clearer that you could charge either.
Right, or none.
Or none, correct, yeah.
Okay, very good. Councilmember Gill, Councilmember Kennedy?
Yes. We'll be a little wind up before I get to the pitch. On the shipping containers, I guess first just a comment to the public. I mean, Nicole had sort of alluded to this as well. I mean, it's not going to be. There have been other developers who've done things with shipping containers, and they've almost always been at least as expensive, if not more, if they try to modify them to standards of comfort that we expect in buildings. But nonetheless, I guess Councilmember Neese did bring up an interesting point. I mean, there are people who really want to do this and are really willing to pay even a premium to do this. And so if they did, is that allowed then in, and I confess I didn't maybe read through all the other, see how it applies to all the other zoning sections, but could they be used anywhere? Or, I mean, it's always comes down to how well is it designed, and it's really difficult to put design into code. And so just, can they be used anywhere, I guess? Like in N1, N1 used to have roof slope requirements and things like that.
Still has it.
Still has it, yes. Okay.
So, I mean, there are roof requirements in the N zones and the NX zones. It's really your choice. Do you want to allow it in all zone districts as a possibility? Or do you want to limit it to, let's say, the mixed use and commercial zones? Because the other more intense zones, it's already allowed, just only as storage. And there are some requirements about fencing and all that kind of stuff. If you're just using a raw container permanently on your site for storage. So you don't have to let it be allowed everywhere. I mean, if it's the council's preference, you can just limit it to certain zone districts. Or you can limit it to certain uses.
As drafted right now, it would be allowed anywhere. It just, we need
Right,
to give
any
the
zone
feedback to you.
district for any use allowed in that zoning, as long as it meets the zoning district and the building code.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Kennedy?
Nicole, on the storage units, there's been one sitting on South 27th, an
So it's a
orange
code
one
enforcement case.
forever.
Yes, it's a code
Is it going to
enforcement
sit there
case.
for another 2 years?
I hope not. I
Okay.
believe we've cited that into court for April.
March.
March, actually, okay,
Okay,
sooner
thank
than
you.
April.
The that since you brought up the containers, I just was wondering on that. The question I have is for code enforcement. We have fences all over the city that in the alley there may be a sight distance problem. And they've been up for 20, 25 years. Is this the time that we can amend that to grandfather these in so we can at least get it off the docket? Because I went around to all of your districts and I stop at about 50 fences that don't meet the requirement. I could probably get up to 100, 150 in each of your wards. So I would like to see that changed so we have a grandfather clause in there.
Well, if you put it up with a permit, at any time in the past, and that permit was a valid permit, the code has changed, that's a legal non-conforming structure. Now, as far as other ones that were built without permits, we typically, in our zoning code, we don't say, hey, you built it wrong, and it's been there for 15 years, it's okay. That's usually not how non-conforming
But code
structures
enforcement
come.
goes around and cites them.
Well, I'm gonna let the planning director talk to you about
Okay.
code enforcement's approach to fences in clear vision areas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Kennedy and Mayor and Council. So a couple things with that issue, and it gets kind of complex pretty quickly. So we have both the situation that you're describing. I think one of the things that we're actually working and have been working with engineering for a while, because there's actually places where there's serious concern that clear vision, like if there's fences blocking clear vision, that it actually can become a significant safety hazard for traffic in those areas. And the effort there that we're working on is literally if the city's going to have to, we've been talking with legal and such, whether the city may in some cases have to literally step in and make modifications with those property owners because, to your point, the fence has been there for many, many years, but it is creating a clear vision issue. And there's several places where whether it's some alleys, I would say more so it's intersections, or it's even entrances to developments where they have placed signage and things out in the clear vision that potentially causes an issue. So we have that whole thing that we're trying to work through. It's pretty complicated because, to your point, there's a lot of locations, but there's also the concern that some of those need to be addressed and moved because they are a hazard, basically, for either pedestrians or for traffic in those areas. So we are looking at that. In terms of the issue of other fences, and if you separate that into other properties where there's fences that have been there a long time, we are trying to figure out. Again, we haven't got a solution at the moment, but working through this because, to your point, so if we have a fence that, as Nicole just pointed out, let's say it was permitted, and then they didn't build it the way it was permitted, and now it's a violation, and we get a complaint, and we go out there and say, okay, yeah, this fence, you need to go back and fix this. we often then will look around the neighborhood to see if there's other fences, code enforcement will, that are in a similar situation. What we're finding is that the answer to that is yes, and some of them have been there a long time, but then it's like, okay, now what are we gonna do? Because we have both current violations and then we have historical violations, and trying to figure out how do we approach that with the property owners if it is, to like Nicole's point, that it's been many, many years. As soon as they would come in for a new permit, absolutely, they would have to build it to code. But the problem with some of them is that they're still there. So it's a challenge, talking with legal on code enforcement is on that as well, because it is an issue of like, how far back do you go and how do you address that? But at the same time, you're dealing with that safety issue. So,
but the problem is, and the case that I'm talking about was issued over a year ago. It's still in abeyance, and we're still in this, well, we may do this and we may do that and everything else. I guess maybe if we can't get something, I would rather see the council take it up and do a grandfathering, and I can do that in an initiative process.
I guess what I would say is before, if possible, before you went to that step, that I can follow up further here with engineering, and we can see where we're at with bringing some more information forward, because they're very involved in this, because it does get into right-of-way and encroachments and traffic. So we can do that.
But most of these that I've looked at, you have the alley, you have the sidewalk, and then you have the fence. And people don't drive 35 to 50 down that alley. And so they stop and then they go. And most of them I've looked at, but I guess if there's other wards that want to address the calls that people want to call them because you guys are going to start enforcing it, I would have a tough time. So I would think that your response back to us would be something that we can work with them if it's been up for 15, 20 years, they haven't done permits, it's up, that we do some type of grandfathering, and then if they change it or whatever, then they would have to meet the codes. But really, Chris and I met with the fencing folks, and the fencing folks put them up, the fences. Their expectations is the landowner needs to go and get the permit. And probably 1 out of every 20 gets a permit, the rest of them don't.
Yeah, Councilmember Kennedy and Mayor and Council, I mean, to that point too, we have been working really closely, both as you apparently have, talking to the fencing companies, but also with property owners where we do have situations where they have to address those that were put up either with a permit, they didn't follow the permit, or without a permit. We've abated some. If you have any recollection on 17th Street West, we actually cut one down because the property owner would not fix it, even though it was in violation. And we actually, another one where we actually participated in some of that to get them to mitigate it. So it just gets tricky. I totally get what you're saying. I think trying to figure out a solution where we're being consistent and we're also dealing with those safety issues is where it gets really tricky in some of those areas.
Well, I hope we hear back from you soon, or I'll bring it back to the council and we'll address it over here.
Well, thank you. I'll visit with engineering and we can at least do some follow-up.
Thank you very much. Councilor Boyett, Councilor Gulick.
So on the screen you showed manufactured homes, car lots, antennas and stuff. When will we as the council, will we have to vote all of those at one time, or will we vote independently on, say, I don't like car lots, but I like antennas? I mean, how are we going to do this as a council going forward?
Sure. As I stated at the beginning, we'll probably break this single ordinance that I've drafted into several, so that if you don't like the shipping container provisions, you can say, I vote no on that. And also the zoning commission would make a recommendation on each one of those ordinances. It wouldn't just be one blanket recommendation. So obviously, errors and omissions and spelling and all that could just be one ordinance by itself. Then we would do the shipping container one, then we could do the other substantive ones as separate ordinances. Those would be have a recommendation from the zoning commission.
You know when that might be happening?
March.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Gillick, Councilmember Rupsis?
So my comment is going on the tangent that Councilmember Kennedy brought up, and so I don't know if there's if that's okay, if that's allowed.
It's a work session, but let's keep it a little short because it is not part. He was just asking, kind of theoretically on this topic.
So I, as you probably have gathered by this point, I am all about pedestrian safety in particular. I think this idea, though, of the clear vision triangles may be a misplaced attempt at safety. It's downtown, we have alleys, we have buildings right up to the corner there, and we don't knock down buildings. And people who are driving in those alleys drive accordingly. They can't see around the corner. They know that there could be pedestrians that go by, so people behave accordingly. So I think this issue of the clear vision triangles really does need to be rethought, or just at least considered more closely, because I don't see a problem, I guess, offhand. I could be shown something, but at least we have conditions downtown where there was a city ordinance that was also at city intersections that said we had to have clear vision triangles. We got rid of that because it was put all of downtown in violation of that. So anyhow, I think that's something that needs to be taken up with engineering further.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Ripsis, you had your hand up, right?
Thank you, Mayor. Nicole, just real quick on the shipping container thing. Would this allow, say, a small shipping container to be used as like a she shed or something like that in somebody's backyard? It's not like a dwelling unit?
Yeah. Well, as long as it met building code and the zoning requirements. So, for example, a detached accessory structure, the siding of that structure of anything over 200 square feet or larger has to match the siding of the home. So unless you have a vertical steel sided home, you can't just leave the outside of it in place. You would have to build like a structure around the structure.
Do we need this change in order to allow that type of thing?
Yeah, good.
Was there Councilmember Nish, you had your hand up? Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess it's better the time to talk about this and get it on the table as a discussion is because to make a motion to direct staff to not include residential or containers in residential zones. And if there's a second, we can at least discuss it and have our discussion about whether or not we actually want to do that. Councilmember Rupsis brought up a good comment about ADUs. Or at least maybe, anyway, that's my motion, just so we can get on the table to discuss it, make amendments to it if that's what it makes, but just want others, council members, to determine, is it something we want to talk about now a little more in depth instead of wait until the ordinance comes before us and try to talk about it then?
Okay, so motion to instruct staff to scratch the residential zones for storage containers in any situation.
Yeah, that's initially where I'll start with.
I'll second.
Councilmember Kennedy goes along with that. So I guess that's the question for you is that the direction you want to give staff?
So, Mayor, if you don't mind.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I wanted mainly, again, as I mentioned, I wanted to really have a conversation about this, and maybe it shouldn't be allowed by right. Maybe it should be a special review option instead. And I'd be open to something like that because I think Councilmember Ripsis brings up a good point about ADUs. But then again, I don't know how many square feet a shipping container is. I haven't measured one. But if it's under 250 square feet, it sounds to me like they can just pop it in their backyard and use it as an ADU, and all their neighbors have to look at it. But so I'm not sure if this is the best place for in residential, especially since our recode has really done a lot to kind of design aesthetics within the zones. And so I would like to see some kind of limitation on that where it's in residential. So that's where I'm at now.
Okay, Councilmember Boyette?
I'll throw it in. I don't want to open Pandora's box where we have more troubles than it's worth. I've been in other cities where this isn't, it looked like hell. So I don't want to start the process. I would be against this.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Owen. And Councilmember Shaw?
I guess I'm a little confused. These have to meet existing codes, they have to be up to standards, they are a housing option. They might not be a super affordable one, but they are a housing option. And I don't know that as the largest city in the state, we should be fearful of change. I think we had to lead change and acknowledge that people are doing this. Sometimes they do it well, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they do stick built well and sometimes they don't. I mean, this is a housing option, so I'm not sure why we would foreclose it at the outset when it feels like we do have safeguards in terms of the siding standards, the other standards, building codes, inspections, all those sorts of things. Nicole, I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but this feels like foreclosing something unnecessarily. I think maybe I see the opposite of Councilmember Neese.
Well, I can tell you that when we talked about shipping containers, they were not mentioned anywhere in our code at the time that we updated it in 2021. And when we talked about that issue in our working groups and steering committee, they thought it was appropriate to just limit it to those kind of very intense commercial and industrial zone districts. Your opinion was like, I don't see how this can go well. That, I think Councilmember Boyette was on our steering committee. I think that he would probably agree that we had a lot of issues on the table, and one of those they didn't want to tackle was like, how can we make this shipping container use okay in zone districts? But we do have building codes, and we do have zone district standards that apply. So, I don't have any strong feelings one way or the other. I think that the zoning commission is probably going to give you a good recommendation either way.
Do you think that the design standards or the zone standards and the building codes are adequate protection to ensure that new innovative ideas are not run down, shamble, neglect, rusting, all those sorts of things? And I guess combined with code enforcement.
Well, I can tell you that the detached accessory structure in residential zones, if it's less than 200 square feet, then that siding material doesn't apply. So they literally could leave the steel siding in place. There are shipping containers that are available that are less than 200 square feet. Mobile store on South Frontage Road has a variety of sizes of shipping containers and storage units. Most of what they do is they refurbish the old shipping containers and they paint them as a uniform color, and they fix any doors or things on them that are not so good. And they are marketing to people in Billings as like, here's your storage solution. You don't want that crummy shed from Home Depot. We've got a 192 square foot, 8 by whatever that is, shipping container that we'll just drop it in your backyard for you.
So my last question, Mayor, I don't want to foreclose innovation. I don't want to cut off housing options. I want to encourage people to be creative. Can we do that in a different way other than establishing it by right, to Councilmember Neese's concern?
Could, as long as artfully say, okay, any shipping container that's remodeled and used in a neighborhood district has to be at least 200 square feet. So you can't buy the tiny one that maybe
a shed
doesn't look so great in someone's backyard. It's not big enough to meet those design requirements, the small design requirement that we have in our code. detached accessory structure is also required to have a similar roof. So even if they just use the raw container, they'd still have to put a roof over it, which usually involves supports and posts. And while you're at it, just throw some siding on that.
Councilmember Owen, are
I mean,
we okay to go to Councilmember Shaw, or you're?
I'm done.
Okay,
Yeah,
Councilmember
I
Shaw?
guess I'm not seeing the benefit of eliminating it as an option, because what I'm hearing from you is that people can still put up an extremely ugly 200 square foot storage unit in their backyard that could look even worse than a shipping container, and that is already allowed. I mean, in theory they could. Is that somewhat correct?
But I referenced the one that you can buy off the lot at Home Depot. Those typically are not, they don't look bad, right?
But I guess I'm just trying to make the case of, like, I guess someone could be like, I'm just gonna build a 200 square foot thing that doesn't look good, has no insulation, has, I built it myself in my backyard. That would be allowed currently.
Still have to meet the zoning requirements, so it still have to have a pitched roof. If it's 200 square feet, it still has to meet the siding requirement, it has to still meet the setbacks.
Even if it's not a dwelling unit?
Even if it's not yes, yes.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand the distinctions here, so, yeah.
There's accessory structures like storage sheds and garages, or little things where people store their lawnmower. Those are allowed by the building code. Those are allowed by zoning, but they do have some basic standards in the zoning. So even if it's less than 200 square feet, it still has to, the roof pitch of that structure has to match, be similar to the roof pitch of the home. It can't be in the front yard, it can't be in the side yard, it can only be in the rear yard.
So is there any reason why we wouldn't just have that be the requirement of, sure, a shipping container is allowed as a base structure, but it doesn't matter what size it is, you still have to meet all of those requirements? I guess I'm trying to understand the concern of, I think it's what it looks like. Is that kind of accurate?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, it's the presentation of it.
I think they could put in smaller shipping containers without having to meet a lot of these things.
Well, that's what I'm trying to.
And so,
but Nicole says
again,
no.
I think it could be addressed as a special review, because then we're going to actually see probably. I would assume we'd see the design, we'd see maybe the plot, how they're going to do it, and then we as council can make a decision at a special review. So I'm open to that. If people want to see shipping containers utilized for the function of a resident house in residential neighborhoods, I think there needs to be some oversight of the council on that to make sure we're not developing, a council member Boyett mentioned, and he's seen in other cities, and and maybe in the future we find everything's great, maybe the council can take it out of special review. But I think when we're going to something like this, where it's really new and it's innovative and it could be an option, like Councilmember Rups has said, maybe there needs to be some guidelines or guardrails on it to ensure that it's utilized well before we just allow it by right.
But I guess what Nicole's saying is that already is going to exist in the code. So I'm just trying to understand that it will already have design requirements and building code requirements.
Well, those design requirements only apply to accessory buildings, not accessory dwelling units. Accessory dwelling units design requirements have been prohibited by state law, which is now in effect.
So the bottom line is something that holds your lawnmower needs to look good, something that holds you can look like crap.
Is that
the
right?
bottom line, right? That's kind of what it
It
comes
still
down
has
to.
to meet the building
care
code,
about our
and it still
lawnmowers.
has
I'm trying to understand this, because I don't want to preclude this as an option as long as it isn't going to look ugly. I think, and so if that's taken care of already, then I don't see why we would say no, it's not allowed. Does that make sense?
So the idea of special review in a neighborhood zone district, residential zone district, for use as an accessory or as a dwelling unit, not for the other things, but as a dwelling unit, could certainly be something that you could put in, we could write that into the code. Shipping containers intended to be used in neighborhood districts as a dwelling unit require special review.
Question, Nicole, and then Councilmember Kennedy. I don't like jumping into the pools in the dark head first. That's my sense that however we do this, we're kind of pioneers and it's dangerous. Do we know what other cities, there's lots of shipping containers in the world, there are lots of other cities in the world. Do we have any sense of that? And if we can't answer that, especially if this motion does not pass, my encouragement for staff would be dig into this, because obviously we don't have a staff report. We don't have anything in writing about describing these issues. So we're going to need that unless the motion passes, and it just goes away on residential, although even on the commercial we might benefit from more. But can you address, do you know what other cities are doing on this issue?
I don't know what other cities in Montana are doing. The data I have is dated from 2018, 2019, when we were digging into this issue as we were crafting the new code. I can refresh that data. Obviously, either way, if the motion passes or it doesn't pass, that data would be important for both the zoning commission and the public and you to know.
Yeah, okay. There was a discussion.
I think the one thing that Councilman Neese is trying to address is you don't put an air mattress and a coffee can in there and say that's your new mother-in-law apartment. So I think we can probably address this through a special review and go ahead forward with this, but just add on to it a special review and then let the staff work with that. And then it comes back as a special review after you take a look at it. And then when we get some years down the line, we can always make that change.
Is that the new amendment or motion?
So yeah, that'd be inconsistent with the existing motion, which is just scratch it from residential. So we can vote on the existing motion, or you can withdraw the motion and make a new motion.
If he wants to make he can either make it, I'll second if he wants to make the motion, or I'll change my motion to be a special review if that.
Yeah, since you made the original, so.
Okay. I'll make a vote. Who did the second? I don't remember.
I think Bill did.
As long as he's willing to agree, then I'll make a motion to direct staff to have residential uses of shipping containers to come to council for special review. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you.
As dwelling units, right?
As dwelling units, yes.
Okay, and that is going to trigger some additional research and fleshing out of the issue. So that's the new motion. Councilmember Rupsis.
Do those kind of variances usually come to council, or they go to is there an adjustment board or something like that? Like
a special
people
review.
usually going for variances are not coming to council.
Well, a special review is a kind of a variance. It's like a use variance, but it always comes to you. Goes through the zoning commission first, public hearing, they make a recommendation to you, and you have public hearing.
I'm kind of concerned about these types of things coming to council. Would it fit better as a variance?
Well, I guess it's not typically submitted as a variance because variances are not use-based in our code. The only governing board that can provide a use variance as a special review or conditional use is the city council.
Variances
Under
are usually
state law,
design-based.
it's not allowed to go through the Board of Adjustment.
But variances are typically design-based?
They're design-based, they're numerical, like I want to have a 45-foot tall house. The code says I can only go 34 feet. I want a variance to go to 45. They rule on whether a 45-foot tall house on that specific lot is okay. It's not that I want to put a.
Yeah. I mean, to me, this sounds more like a variance where you're like, I have a wooded lot, my neighbors can't see me, I want to put a little, 8 by 12 shipping container out there so I can make an office or something I can work in out of the day. That sounds like more of a variance than a special review that would need council to come in and talk about. there?
We do have the administrative relief requirement, but that's also for numerical changes. Now, if it is that you say that any reuse of a shipping container in a residential zone or a dwelling has to come to you as a special review, that's the way we'll write the code. Things that are not dwellings, like it's an accessory building for, I need a quiet place for my office, and this is what I'm gonna use, and this is how I'm gonna put it together, and it'll meet the building code for that type of use. Or it's, I need a place to get away from my kids. Or I wanna build a sauna, and this is the structure I'm gonna use to start with. Or, a million other things that people can use as accessory to the residential. But if it has a dwelling in it, that's a different.
Now I'm more confused.
Yeah,
That's what
Nicole,
I
what's your
kind of got
understanding of what you
motion.
would like us to give you authority to do, and is it consistent with the motion you heard?
The motion I heard was that in residential, use of a shipping container for a dwelling requires special review.
But, well, what do you intend then for non-dwellings? For
sheds?
Sheds or, office or something?
My preference would be not to see shipping containers just plopped in a backyard. I don't know if the council would be willing to say a special review for any shipping containers in residential. It's really the appetite of the council, if the council agrees with that or not.
And that's why I wanted it.
That's what Councilman
Get rid of
Moreno
it.
wants, and I want that.
Because it's gonna open.
But I mean, how many other council members want to see shipping containers not be in residentials unless there's a special review?
Councilor Neese, my suspicion is we don't know. We don't know enough about the issue to get to that ultimate conclusion. So I'm wondering if the movements would be okay to just direct staff to, they've heard this discussion, to give us a more detailed description of construction with the storage units, what other cities are or not doing, what our options might be to limit them, a broader approach of a broader menu of options as opposed to just do X, and then see what staff comes back with that. So we're not taking any direction right now. We're just kind of asking staff to dig into the issue.
And I guess the direction would be to not bring this amendment to us until council's had further information and to discuss it.
Right. This would go on the table until staff has dug into the issue and given us a better menu of options.
But then that would prevent it to be utilized in different commercial zones and stuff, I believe is kind of where the problem was.
What I was contemplating is, right, we do nothing when it comes to storage units until we hear back from staff and have a chance to digest things in writing.
And that would leave it the way it is currently.
I'd leave it the way it is for now. But I'm putting words in your mouth, that's not the motion.
I'm seeing nods around the council. Does everyone else agree?
I don't see any harm in that myself, yeah.
And I don't see any harm with that either. If you're okay with the movement, that would be the motion to do, then I'll make the motion to not make this change until there's time where the staff can bring back additional information about storage units, especially in the residential zone use.
Okay, so if that motion is clear enough, let's have a vote. We're getting to that time, so please, Councilmember Roy.
Did you include this because there are people who are trying to do this? Are we about to stop development with this?
We're not about to stop development. We get inquiries about once or twice a month.
Wow. So there is some interest.
There is some interest in doing it, but
For
usually it's for smaller buildings. I haven't had one come in for residential purposes. I've heard from people who wanted to use it as permanent storage units, as coffee kiosks, drive-through services like that.
Will we hold up business if we adopt this?
No. We won't hold up business. I mean, kind of in the middle of winter. There's
Okay.
time enough to get to storage units.
All right, so is the motion clear enough to have a vote? All right,
Yes.
so if in favor of the latest motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion's unanimous, including Councilmember Tidswell online. So we need to move on to make sure there's nothing else on this. But one last question, when it comes to storage units, Nicole, on the issue of temporary storage, use of containers for temporary storage, and I apologize if this was already mentioned before, but is there a time limit? Because I know I had a couple drop down outside my window, and years later, they were still there. Do we have any sort of time limit?
Were they on the street?
No, they were just on in a parking lot adjacent to a building.
There is a time limit of 1 year that they can be used as temporary storage. And I believe your zone district is probably neighborhood office.
It was.
So we don't even allow it in that zone district. But if they appeared before the code amendment in 2021, they could just be grandfathered.
And I think that might have been the case, so, okay.
Unfortunate.
Okay, council, anything else on either that topic or anything else in the proposed changes that you want to discuss? Okay, we'll open it up for public comment. Is there any public comment on item number 2, the proposed changes to the zoning code? Seeing nobody coming forward, we'll close the public comment period. Council, anything else on item number 2? Okay, that's a wrap. Then that concludes our regular agenda. Is any public comment on anything that wasn't on our agenda tonight? No one is coming forward. Any items of council discussion generally? Councilmember Kennedy?
That's for you. Mayor, you sent out for the appointment of the next person in Ward 3. I'm sorry that I could not make it last Thursday. I have talked with about 6 of the candidates from Ward 3. I just want to remind people, I represent Ward 3. I was elected in Ward 3. I did the doors in Ward 3 and listened to what the people had to say. Out of that, the number one issue, and this council talks about it all the time, is public safety. And with the public safety, when I knocked on the doors, I asked the residents what their priorities were, and they responded public safety was their main concern. I did ask them, was it for more police officers and detectives, or more prosecutors, or more safety officers, or other issues that were all involved in the public safety levy. And there was a whole gamut of things in the public safety levy. And the number one concern is to have more officers and detectives in the city of Billings. And I understand, yes, the chief had told me that it's a perception and other things going on, but this is what the folks in Ward 3 have been saying. I have a low-income area in the middle. I have a higher area in Briarwood, all the way up to Park Hill and below the ditch. In that area, we have a real diverse, mixed group of people. The Central Terry area has a very high crime rate, lots of rentals, and we have a large senior population. So as I come back, Mayor, you had asked for 3 from the Thursday night. I'm not going to give that to you. What I'm giving you is I will support a candidate that's willing to work with the residents and support more law enforcement officers and detectives. We would need to find those dollars in the budget, And so at this time, I feel that what the number one priority of the people in Ward 3 is to make sure they can feel safe in their own homes. And to be able to do that, and talking with people in my area, I think I knocked on more than 1,000 doors in our area, and then I text probably 2,500 more of them and talk to people on the phone. The real thing has been in this area is public safety. So whoever the next person is from Ward 3, that your name comes back up to the council. I would hope that's the number one issue. I did not hear from folks saying park, park, park. I did not hear from them saying, can you do this or that? The water issue was not an issue at that time when I was knocking on the doors, but I can tell you the number of phone calls I have from that one. But it's the safety, and that has been a top thing. And I'm real happy that we had that study done, but it really scares a lot of people with the response rate of going from 11 to 17 minutes. It really scares a lot of people with the amount of overtime that we have and not enough officers that we have, and not enough detectives. We can have all the CSOs and everyone else. It really makes them feel nervous when we're pushing to try to overtime to try to get 9 people per shift. It is, and the number of people in this town, it's not just do we have this many, it's how many retirements and how many people are not staying the full course with law enforcement in this community. Those are really scary items, especially in the midsection of Billings. And a lot of us have been there for a lot of years. I've lived on my corner for 33 years. So I want you to take into I have a copy for all of you, just so you can read where I'm coming from. But it's talking with people in the area. I would hope you would take that into consideration when you look at the 13 or 15 candidates we have. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Any other items of council discussion? If not, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill, could you give a